and welcome to Dip In and Out with Lucy, the podcast that opens up the discussion around domestic abuse. I'm very fortunate this morning to be sitting down with Ruth Dodsworth. Ruth is a British broadcast journalist and weather presenter, and many people will know Ruth's story, but I think it's only right to hand over to Ruth to explain a little bit more about Ruth's experience.
Hello there. Hi, Lucy. Thank you so much for having me. It's very lovely to be with you. I mean, I guess my story is pretty much, I listen to people telling stories about domestic abuse, and I'm the same as everybody else. So there's nothing different about my story. There's nothing unusual. And I think it's a story that sort of hit the headlines in a sense because of the job that I do. So I've worked at ITV for over 25 years. So you might know me, you might not. Probably for about 20 years of that, I've been a weather presenter. And for pretty much 20 years of that, I was living in an abusive marriage. So it sort of became my sort of working life and my home life in a sense were two very, very different things. So if you saw me on social media, saw me on Instagram, saw me whatever, you probably think, gosh, she's living her best life. But actually, as is so often the case, it was probably couldn't have been further from the truth. My ex-husband was sentenced to prison. He got 3 years and 9 months for coercive controlling behaviour and stalking. There were a number of other charges, but we dropped those in a plea deal. But I guess for me, it wasn't about that. It was just about him kind of saying sorry, which never really happened. So like so many people, I lived in an abusive marriage. We got married 20 years previous. It was all very exciting. It was very new. Yes, he was quite possessive from the word go. Yes, I watched him screaming and shouting and swearing at his mum and his sister, but didn't really sort of think anything of it. Red flags, I'm sure people will be thinking right now. But you want your relationship to work, and so in the new days when it's all, as I say, very exciting, a bit of possessiveness is actually quite nice, isn't it? You think, well, gosh, he must really love me. But there's a very fine line between sort of a little bit of jealousy and possessiveness, and then that then becoming something more sinister, which I think I could admit now happened quite quickly on in our relationship. Kind of the controlling behavior, which I didn't really understand. I didn't see, I guess, because you're so immersed in that relationship. The arguments, which then sort of became physical, and sort of escalated over the years. I had 2 children who grew up not really realizing that what was going on wasn't normal. That the fact mummy was locking him in the bathroom when daddy was having one of his rampages, they thought that's how other kids grew up. They didn't realize there was anything different about that. Mummy crying, mummy being in hospital, mummy not wanting to come home, mummy being scared, all of that was going on behind closed doors for over 20 years. And I think if it wasn't for the fact someone actually said to me, Ruth, if you don't ring the police, I will. I mean, my husband, now ex-husband, basically said to me, if I can't have you, no one can, and no one else will ever love you as much as I do. Phrases which I say out loud now and think, oh my God, it absolutely chills me. But, if I had gone home that particular night, I wouldn't be here, I'd be dead. He had every intention of no one else having me, of me not leaving him. There would be no divorce. There would just be no me. And I think, the headlines were, my children were quoted as saying, don't come home, mummy, he will kill you. And I think that pretty much sums up the relationship in a sense,
Yeah.
And I guess I didn't really realize that I knew it was wrong. I knew I was deeply unhappy and I knew my life was in danger, but I didn't really understand that it was domestic abuse, like so many people,
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, like I would say to anybody, thank you so much for sharing, because it is unbelievably difficult, I think, in some ways to admit to yourself that there has been abuse. And I think, again, like you say, you're in a relationship for a very long time. Possession, protectiveness can all be disguised and come across as, like you say, everybody would like somebody to be that little bit jealous and love them and care for them. But very quickly, perpetrators are very clever at kind of building that bond and making sure that, and as you say, you see it with how they treat their own families, how they treat their pets, there's all those kind of things that go on. And it's the awful thing is that you think that isn't going to happen to you. And sadly, it is happening over a period of time, slowly, insidiously building up. And
Lisa, I never thought, I had a really happy childhood. I grew up, went to university, did my postgraduate. I'm a professional person. I never in a million years imagined that I'd be like sitting here talking to you now about domestic abuse, and the fact that I lived in a situation like that for 20 years. It's like you said, it's hard to admit to yourself, because in a way that's kind of an element of self-preservation. It's almost survival. It's okay, he'll be better tomorrow, it doesn't matter, it was just an argument. Very classic sort of in our relationship was he would go off on a rampage and he broke my wrist, you name it. He was very physically violent, but the next morning it would be as if nothing ever happened. And in a weird way, that was survival, because for me, I never asked him about it. I never asked him why he did it, because I knew the minute I did that would trigger another argument. So it's in a sense, you hide it from yourself, and you certainly hide it from the outside world, because no one knew. I think a couple of people had an inkling. My mum and dad, who now kind of live with us, sort of we wish we'd known, and we wish we'd been able to help you. We wish we'd done more. I was very, very good at hiding the physical signs. When you can hide bruises, you can wear long sleeves, you can do all of that. But on top of that, I was losing weight. My hair was coming out. I look back at some of the stuff I did on telly kind of 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, and I think my weight went down to something like 6 stone. I'm 5'2". I just looked like a skeleton, and people on social media were like, "Oh gosh, is she ill, Ruth? Well, you're looking," and I, it wasn't a deliberate thing. I think stress, nerves, fear, living on eggshells, treading on eggshells will do that to you physically. But I didn't want to admit it to the outside world. I didn't want anyone to meddle in our relationship. I thought actually that staying, in a weird way, was, I'd married this man. No one in my family's ever got divorced. I didn't want people to know. I didn't want the shame. I just, and actually, it was easier to hide it than it was to admit it to the outside world. I mean, hindsight is an amazing thing. Gosh, what was I thinking? But yeah, self-preservation is a weird thing, isn't it? And you do what it takes.
That's such a good point to make as well, that hiding it is actually easier than admitting it, 100%. And I think going to look for support, I'll often say that can be the most daunting thing, because then you are admitting to yourself that something is going on and this isn't normal behavior.
Definitely. And then and then there's the fear of change, isn't there? I mean, it sounds like a really weird thing to say, but I'd lived like that for 20 years, and so the thought of not living like that was like, well, how do you do it? I mean, in my case, financial control was very much part of the coercive control, and it crept up over the years, and I didn't realize. And it sounds daft to say, I didn't have access to my own money, but actually I didn't. My bank card disappeared and it was never replaced, and I didn't have the banking app, and my money would go in and he would take it out from the bank, and then I'd have to ask him if I wanted to go buy food or anything. And I think taking away my access to money basically cut me off from the outside world, and it just made me wholly dependent on him. He became the focal point and the center of everything. So I had to ask, and I think there was that fear on his point of view that if I did have access to the outside world, that gave me the ability to get out of the relationship, and that's the last thing he wanted. It was control and power. I was his possession, so making me have to ask him for the basics, just for money to I don't know, pay for the kids, anything along those lines. I had to ask permission, in a sense. And that aspect of sort of domestic abuse is, and it's very, I think the word is insidious, but it's very, very damaging as well. And there are so many reasons why people stay in these abusive relationships, because I absolutely had no means of getting out. I mean, when you haven't got money, you can't go and jump on a bus, you can't book a hotel, you can't get the kids out, pack the kids out. You are forced to stay, in a sense. And why didn't I ask him for money? Why didn't I ever shout? Because again, the minute you ask, or you point out that something's not right, or that then triggers an argument. So again, self-preservation kicks in, and you don't ever ask and you don't ever question.
Yeah, and that's so true. And I think that's one of the hardest things for society in general to understand, is when they say, well, why didn't you just leave? It's one of those classic questions. Why didn't you just leave? Why did you stay? And again, it is always putting that blame back on the victim, on the survivor. And the difficulty is people don't understand just how many areas of your life, you know, like you've just said, obviously there's the physical, there's the financial, there's the emotional, there's the psychological. It covers so many different aspects. And when you're experiencing so many of those, then I think, unfortunately, you know, it does make it very difficult to leave. And you've got children, as you say, you've invested 20 years.
I mean, how ridiculous was this? I didn't want my kids to come from a broken home. I thought keeping the family together was actually the right thing to do. I was worried if I spoke up and people knew what was going on, would social services get involved? Would I lose my kids? There are 1,001 reasons why people stay in an abusive relationship. And again, you know, hindsight is an amazing thing. I wish I'd got out sooner, but I didn't know how to. I guess I live with the mum guilt. Is that a phrase? The guilt that, you know,
it is now.
I tell you what, being a parent is just guilt, full stop, isn't it? Yeah. But I live with the fact that, you know, I didn't get my children out of that relationship, out of that household sooner. I so wish I had, but I just didn't know how to. So that's something that, you know, going forward, I live with. But, you know, I'm super lucky in that my kids are amazing. My daughter is 20 now. She's doing a law degree because she's been so inspired by it, by this whole thing that she's, you know, she wants to help others. My son is 18 and he struggled with it an awful lot. He was diagnosed with PTSD. You know, my son over the years was very much my protector, and you know, he sort of wrestled his father off me over the years and had to sort of, you know, physically protect me from him. So I think for Jack, it's been quite a tough thing. But that being said, you know, we're all alive, and actually well, and actually happy, and
moving forward.
You know, we've got a stable home environment where there's no fear, there are no arguments and no shouting. And yeah, you know, gosh, I mean, financially, it's difficult. I mean, I'm lucky I earn a wage, so I can afford to pay rent. I mean, my ex-husband was a drinker, a gambler, a smoker. So the home that I thought we owned, I mean, that's all gone. The car, you know, the Instagram lifestyle was fake, and that's all disappeared. So, you know, I'm renting a little bungalow, little old lady's house, and I'm debts that he, you know, credit cards that he took out in my name and more, you know, things like that. But in a weird way, that's almost insignificant. The fact is that, you know, I'm alive and well, and my children are okay, are doing okay, you know, and we've got what I call the happy life, the life I should have had, you know, and we're building it day by day, and we take each day as it comes. But I've always said the very fact I'm alive and able to sit here and have this conversation with you is because I got out of that relationship. If I hadn't, my friend hadn't forced me, in a sense, to ring the police, I'd be dead. It's as plain, you know, it's black and white. It is as simple as that, because my relationship, like every other domestic abuse relationship, was going down that pathway. And I was lucky enough that I had support to get out in terms of a friend, and family, actually, who, once they knew what was going on, were amazing. Not everybody has that, you know, and I'm very aware that for the men and women who are stuck in abusive relationships, it's easy for me to say, get out, as we've been saying, Lucy, isn't it? That's the hardest thing to do. But if you're listening or watching this and it's happened to you or someone you know, you've got to get out. You have to, because it could cost you your life if you don't.
100%. And I think it's really brave to say that, because it is so hard to try and get that message across. And like you say,
it's easier said than done. I
absolutely.
know that.
And we can all have friends who want to say something but daren't say something. They're scared of losing that friendship. Exactly.
And I didn't want them to know. There was that embarrassment, but it was easier that they didn't know.
Yeah,
you know,
100%. And family as well. Trying to when your family realize, like you say, so you know, not only feel a certain amount of guilt yourself, your family feels guilty for not stepping up and saying something. And they need the support as well, because I think sometimes for them, you know, and I think a big part is around the language that we do use, how we talk to people. One thing I often say is, when people say recovering from abuse, I'll always say, they've not got a cold, you know, let's not call it recovery. Let's be honest here and say, you move forward, you take it one step at a time. And I think when you've done what you've done, which is faced probably your worst fear, let's be honest, in life. In some ways, the rest of your life, and this is what I really would love people who've experienced abuse to understand, is it can be the best of your life. You know, you really
You
can
know,
have that.
there's no manual to this, so everyone's experience is different. But you know, I've now got a new relationship. I've remarried, and people say, "Well, how can you trust your new husband? How can you trust a man? How can you trust?" Because you can, because not everybody is an abuser. They're genuinely not, and there are so many good men and women out there who are just, you know, they are decent people. And yeah,
Absolutely.
I've had to sort of relearn things. So, for example, you know, my new husband doesn't need to know where I am every minute of the day. If I'm 5 minutes late getting home from work, I don't have
You
to
have to
explain.
explain yourself.
I don't have to worry if my phone rings. I don't have to worry that he's tracking me, that, you know, I have, in a weird way, I have a freedom now. My money is my money. It's everything that my first marriage should have been.
But again, what you've said there is so true, because it's realizing, and for so many people, it's not having to explain yourself every 5 seconds, not having to over explain or say sorry every 5 minutes, or all those things that you have to unlearn in a way. And
Yeah,
it takes time, but like you say, the right relationship, it can happen 100%.
it's absolutely, it's doable, you know. And you know, my parents now see that. I mean, they love my new husband. He's fabulous, and I love him to bits
Oh,
too. And I go, like,
you can tell the way you talk about him, the smile.
you know, for my family, and they've sort of said, you know, we feel like we've got our daughter back. And yeah, life is blinking lovely. It really, really is. But you know, my ex-husband, it sounds like a strange thing to say, but there's a bit of he's always there.
Yeah.
And I do live in fear, in a sense that he's off license in a couple of months. So we have lifetime restraining orders. But again, you know, this is a man who isn't sorry. Basically, it's my fault. And I do worry. I do lock the doors at night. I do lock the windows. There's an element of, you know, slightly looking over my shoulder, but actually that gets less and less. But it's he becomes, I think, less of a figure in daily life.
Yeah.
Less important, less impactful, and actually the balance has changed. And now my new life is my everything. And like I said, it doesn't go away.
No.
You'll never, you know, you'll never put that box on the shelf and forget about it altogether. And everyone has different ways of dealing and processing and surviving the brave new world. But you know, that like I said, we all do it in our own way. But how lucky are we to be able to do that in the first place? You know,
Absolutely. And
yeah.
it does in a strange way. I think experiencing abuse for so many people, it does then, once, you know, if you are fortunate to be coming out the other side of that situation and moving forward and processing day by day. And yes, I always say there'll be good days, there'll be bad days, but the good days are so much better than you could ever imagine what you thought were your good days when you're in the relationship. You know, it's a whole.
Yeah, one really small thing. I just remember, I think, I can't remember what particular day it was, but my mum had given me a £5 note, which is, so it was not long after the relationship with my ex-husband's came to an end. And my mum gave me a £5 note because I had no money at all. And I went to, I won't mention the name, a coffee shop, shall we say, and I bought a coffee with a £5 note. And it was almost like the most exciting thing I'd ever done, because I didn't have to ask permission. I didn't have, you know, it was such an achievement. I was actually in this coffee shop by myself, didn't have to explain anything, and I bought myself a coffee. And that was one of the, I'll never forget that, because it sounds so small and so simple, but when you've not had that ability to do anything for yourself, suddenly you realize there's
pleasure.
there's
Yeah.
a whole world out there to do. It's I do kind of take each day and think, I'm so lucky. I'm so lucky. And I have a newfound appreciation for absolutely everything. I really do. And I don't take things for granted, because I am one of the lucky ones. I really am. And you know, I don't intend to waste this time now. And I think you know, talking to you, Lucy, I guess with the profile that I've got, and the fact that people might see me on telly, and you know, if I could tell you how many people have said to me, because of your story, or because you're talking about it, because we're having these conversations, I now recognize it in myself, or my mum, or my sister, or my brother. It is happening to so many of us, and it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter if you're male, female, old, young. It doesn't matter what creed, what color, what race you are. This can happen. Domestic abuse can happen to absolutely anybody, and it is happening way more than people realize, and it's happening behind closed doors, and it's costing people their lives, and it's getting worse because we all, these are difficult times that we're living in. We know that the world is not a kind place. And what do? We take it out on our nearest and dearest, don't we? And cost of living, people are just living so stressful lives, and you just don't know. You really don't know what goes on. But I think the scale of this, the number of people who have these experiences is it's terrifying. It really is terrifying.
But thanks to people like you say, you have the profile that some people would say, I've got the profile, but I don't want to do that. That's my past, like you said, and I'm going to move forward. And actually what you're doing is saying, yeah, it is part of me, and it's always going to be part of me. And if I can turn that into sharing my story, into raising that awareness that domestic abuse doesn't discriminate, it doesn't care who it hurts. It can actually happen to anybody.
And I think one thing I've come to realize is it doesn't discriminate, but it doesn't have to define you either.
Yes.
So, if you, for example, you look at my social media now, it's butterflies and rainbows and sunshine and showers and all that kind of lovely stuff. But part of me is that. Part of me is this conversation as well. And, I don't shy away from either, because it's, this is the journey that I'm on, and I know other people are on this journey with me. And I guess by having these icky conversations and talking about these things, but also by us having the lovely stuff as well, does show people that it can happen to blink in anyone.
Yeah.
And it happened to me for 20 years, for goodness sakes,
Yeah.
So it's so important that not everyone wants to talk, not everyone is able to talk. So I guess this weird platform that I have has sort of given me that responsibility in a way for to keep on talking for people who maybe don't have a voice or can't put this into words. So I want to do the right thing, and I want to make sure that we do keep having these icky conversations, because it's the only way that we're going to stop this ultimately. I mean, we shouldn't be here. We shouldn't be having these conversations. We should, in an ideal world, no one would be in an abusive relationship, but we know the world is far from ideal, and so we need to do this. We need to keep it going.
Absolutely. And doing it in a way where, like I say, hopefully, because this isn't intimidating, this is two people talking and making it perfectly normal day-to-day conversation that you could be sitting having a coffee and chatting about it. Yeah.
I mean, there's no way that you can ever normalize domestic abuse. It is not normal. No. But what you can do is show that as awful as it is, by getting out of that relationship, it can then allow you to have a more normal life, for lack of a better word, because what's normal these days? But please tell me, because I don't.
I'm far from normal, so I don't know myself. But if we, talking about it it has to be less taboo, and it has to be more. And I often think, in terms of when we talk about mental health now, and we all talk about it a bit more freely, which is fantastic. I'd love to think this is what would happen.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, because sometimes if I do sort of television appearances or things, I very, very rarely, and I probably shouldn't say this now because I'm tempting fate, I very rarely get sort of any negativity. The only one thing that someone ever said to me was, "Oh God, are you still banging on about that? Isn't it time? He's done his sentence. Isn't it time you moved on? Let it, let old dog, let sleeping dogs lie. Move on." Well, actually, quite the opposite is my take on it. I will bang on about this until the end of time if I have to, because it's showing that getting out of it is the reason I'm able to bang on about it, and so many people don't realize what's going on. So many people, I didn't know what coercive controlling behavior was. I mean, it was only when my ex was arrested, and the police basically handed me this kind of coercive control for dummies, but those books, it was like and it was what like that. You moment, it was like, oh my God, yes, he did that. He ticked
They-
every single
yeah.
box. And, I mean, I'm still learning about coercive control and domestic. Every day I learn something new. But what I do know is that these relationships will only ever end badly. There's no way of sugaring the pill on that one. There's no flowery way of putting it. It will end ultimately. If you do not get out, it will ultimately end very, very, very badly. And these perpetrators, or whatever you want to call them, are of a kind. They're out of a mold. They tick the same boxes, their behaviors, and it is really, really terrifying. But if you don't realize it, and you're in that relationship, and you can't get out of it, and you don't understand that what's happening is not only is it wrong, but it's also illegal. It's so difficult, isn't it? It is a minefield. It really is. But yeah, let's get all the gory details out there. Let's put cards on the table, and let's give people the information so that they can then realize or recognize in themselves or someone else. And that is what's going to save a life ultimately. And if it's one
Absolutely.
person, one life, then hey, all of this is worth it.
Absolutely. And like you say, the more we talk about it, the more we break down the barriers, the more, we understand what coercive control is. Because one of the things I noticed, very, very lovely person called Karen Kipping did a guest blog on my website around, is it abuse if my partner doesn't hit me? And when I worked for a domestic abuse charity a while ago, one of the main things that would come up in, say, group sessions was, but they never hit me, or they never did this, or they never did that. And it's trying to, again, explain, we have to kind of separate in some way separate it out and say, well, it doesn't always have to be physical. Yes, very sadly, there is physical, but at the same time, it can be a lot of psychological. And actually, like you say, the physical might just be waiting around the corner in that relationship, over time building. It doesn't mean it's not going to happen just because it hasn't happened by that point. And I think that's where we need to unpack it and talk about it more, because making it a conversation, like you say, you can never normalize abuse, but talking about it should become commonplace, and nobody should be ashamed to talk about it. That's the other thing, isn't it? There's no shame whatsoever.
That word, shame and embarrassment, and in a weird way, I don't feel any of that. I feel, I guess, more gutted for the Ruth who should have been living a really happy, lovely life with her 2 children and her husband, and it I guess, yeah, and there's never been any shame for me. I think I mean, in a sense, I didn't really have any choice. I mean, the media picked up on my story, and I read my victim impact statement, which was only ever meant for the court to hear and for him to hear. And within 20 minutes, it was out there, and then the next day, it was all over the press and printed word for word. And so, in a weird sense, there was never, whether I felt shame or not, was never. I never had the chance really, and I guess I hadn't I hadn't expected it to go public. I really hadn't. I thought he'd go to prison and I'd go to work on the following week and no one would be any the wiser. And in a weird way, thank God that the press did publish the story, because people are aware now, people know, and we're changing lives, and we're having these conversations. But I don't know, I don't know about the shame, and I just feel sad for that Ruth.
I'm gonna
I
say
really,
sad, yeah.
and if I could talk to her now, and I would sort of say to her, look, it will be okay, but it will only be okay if you get out.
If you get out, yeah. And you said something before that was really interesting about, say, family and friends saying, but you weren't the Ruth kind of that we knew. And I think that's a very common kind of thing that occurs within friendships, and they will start to notice you change. They'll notice that you're not the same bubbly, happy-go-lucky person that you were, maybe if they've known you a very long time.
I tried to portray all of that. I tried to keep the facade going, and that in itself is exhausting. But those people who do know you will, and people have said now, they now live with the fact that they might have thought something was wrong, but and didn't sort of intervene, But I'll always say to them, there's no guilt on your part. I wouldn't have wanted you to intervene. And actually, one of my colleagues here, she because my ex-husband used to turn up at work, and she noticed I didn't ever have any money, and if she rang my phone, he would answer, and he'd turn up at filming locations where I was. And she actually called me in probably about 10 years ago, And I was so angry with her for daring to sort of suggest that something wasn't right with my marriage, and how could she be so nosy, and she had no right. And we fell out over it. We didn't speak for a long time because I felt that she'd crossed a line. But now, I mean, I talked to her a lot, and she sort of said, well, she lives with the guilt that she knew something was wrong but didn't force it, in a sense, and she feels, that the blame is on her. And I've tried to say, absolutely, I wasn't ready for her to intervene. I wasn't ready to admit to her that this was going on, and it could have cost, would have cost me my job. Everyone is different, and again, if you do have an inkling, if you do have a feeling that something isn't right, I would urge you, even if it's just a text message. And again, you've got to be very careful, because if there's someone is in that abusive relationship, you've got to be so careful on what you text somebody, because you don't know who's seeing that message. But even if it's just you okay, as simple as that.
Are you okay? Yeah.
Needs, it just shows that someone is there.
Yeah.
And I think
you are so yeah. And
careful about how you do it, but just ask.
It does. And again, like you say, it can be as simple as, are you okay? Do you fancy a coffee? Whatever it is. And the awful thing now is, when you realize certain friendships, like you say, there are friendships that will be affected. But actually, I bet your friend in some ways thinks, I'm glad I said what I did. And your friendship will be stronger now. But yes, it's awful that you don't speak for a while, but actually your friendship is stronger because you've gone through that together. You've experienced that together.
And people have said to me, so much of the way I was behaving now makes sense to them. So, for example, the fact that, if work colleagues went out at lunchtime, I never joined them because I didn't have the money. I always make excuses, like I forgot my wallet, or, like I said, why he was turning up, why I was losing weight, why my behavior changed, why I never went out after work, why I was straight, once work finished, I was straight home, because I was terrified of being late, because that would, cause. So much of my behavior during that time now makes sense to the outside world. It's a strange thing to say that. And again, I maybe hadn't really realized that I was behaving that way.
And it takes time. And like you say, there's a lot of reflection, isn't there? I think when you come out of that situation and you do reflect and you do think of things that you wouldn't have thought of maybe before, like you say, and you're thinking, oh my God, there's a lot of processing. That's why I often say process is a better term than recovery, because there's a lot to process, a lot to unpack, and things that you may never have even considered before. And again, when you have children as well, you're trying to process their experiences and you're trying to support them. And there are so many services out there that are brilliant with children and young people to support them, help them work through those emotions and those feelings, because it does impact the whole family.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. The ripple effect of domestic abuse it's massive. There's no doubt. It's not just happening between that couple. It affects everyone around them. Anyone who crosses paths in day-to-day life with that couple will be affected in some way. And I guess that the repercussions are ongoing. They are for me, and as much as my life is wonderful and it is fabulous, it will, like I said before, it will never entirely disappear. At the end of the day, he's the father of my two amazing children, so there will always be that connection. But like I said, it does get less and less of a thing. It really does. As your new life sort of kicks in and takes over, and that's the way it should be, I guess. That absolutely,
You're 100% right. And I love that, because again, it is that hope aspect. And I think if there's one thing anyone takes away from this episode is, I'm always thinking, God, I'm talking about so many aspects of abuse, but what comes out of every single episode is I end up laughing with the person, which is a good thing, because we always end up talking about there are positives. There is light at the end of the tunnel. I did one before Christmas with Richard Port, and he's an MBE, he's a family solicitor, and we talked about there is light at the end of the tunnel, there is hope. It might take time, you might need support while you're getting there, but seeing people like you who are in a position where you can say there is hope, don't give up, get out, but also get the support that you need and get that help. And support services as well can actually help you if you need to draft some kind of safety plan. If there is something you need to do, there are all those options there. And it's just knowing where to look for them. It's just knowing that there is support.
Like you say, in a way, there's almost so much support it's very, very confusing. And I found actually in the sort of initial stages of when my ex-husband was first arrested and then court case, and in that kind of that sort of tsunami of information, and call us, we'll help, this website, this and this.
Yeah.
All I would say to somebody is, don't get bogged down. Try not to, almost, it's very, very overwhelming. And I almost, at that point, I didn't want help, because I didn't want to keep telling my story to different people. I wanted to just curl up into a ball and shut the world out, and let the police do what they had to do, let the court process do what it had to do. But and everyone has different needs and different levels of ability to talk and function. And in those first months and years, actually, I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want therapy. I am having therapy now, because I'm more able to sort of talk about it. I don't cry as much as I used to, and that's a good thing, because I'm not a good crying. I'm a great old mess, to be honest. But thank goodness for lots and lots of
I love it. But do you know what? You just made a really good point, and something that I would notice when I work with different victims and survivors is there is no expiration date. There is no time limit on when you may want to seek. You might seek support straight away, and like you say, feel overwhelmed, feel like it's all too much too soon. You don't have to do it there and then. It might be a couple of years down the line where you think, right, now I want to go and get that support. Now it doesn't have to be there and then. It takes time, and sometimes it is too early. Definitely, yeah.
Absolutely. And this is one thing. I mean, I do a lot of feedback sessions, so talking about my experience with police, for example. And I guess one of the things I often say to them is, look, I was lucky in that we got a conviction, and my ex-husband went to prison. I never set out for prison or any of that. It was never about punishment. It was just about keeping alive, to be honest. But in a sense, he only had himself to blame for that. I mean, when he was on bail, he put another tracker on my car. So things happened. Because I lived with the guilt that, oh my gosh, I've sent my ex-husband to prison. Does that make me a bad person? And the police would sort of say to me, in fairness, you've not sent him to prison. He's sent himself to prison.
Yeah.
And that's something I've sort of wrestled with, because I'd like to think I'm a pretty decent person, and it doesn't sit well with me that someone is suffering because of my actions. But actually, I spent a long time suffering because of his actions. So yes, it wasn't me that sent him to prison. He kind of did that for himself. But it's interesting because as I say, as far as the police are concerned, it's job done. They got the conviction, file goes on the shelf, and they move on to the next one. And actually, in a strange way, I've sort of said to them, you sort of then feel very alone, because the system has moved on, and you're kind of almost left to pick up the pieces and deal with it. And like you said, I actually have found the help and support, and the police have said, look, despite the fact that the case is over, we are still here for you. If you are worried, if you feel that, threatened or you're concerned, then just call us. And so many sort of support networks are available, and there is no deadline. You don't have to ring them with a I almost need the support more now than I did in the very, very beginning when everything was kicking off. I kind of feel that I'm more able to talk now than I was. I mean, we're talking it's 4.5 years ago. So my case, it's still relatively new. But I'm a far different person, and a far more confident person, and a far happier person now than I was 4 years ago. So but yeah, there's, like I said, there's no time frame. The help will be there for you whenever you need it, should you need it.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it's really important that people realize that that help doesn't disappear. It really doesn't.
No, you're right, and that's a brilliant point to make, because again, like I say, there isn't there's no time limit. Some people may, and what does tend to happen is people may go for support, it's too soon, so they end up referred back in for support. Because the second time round, it might be, okay, well, now I can get my head around this. So don't, you don't have to pressure yourself. There's plenty of things, like you say, in the very beginning, it is so overwhelming. There's so much to process. There's so much to think about. And you may be putting that additional pressure on yourself that isn't necessary, and just take your time, because actually that's
yeah. And I actually thought, well, hang on a minute, what's the matter with me? I don't want therapy yet. Does that mean there's something really wrong with me? So then you start convincing yourself that maybe I should be doing, listen, everyone, you take it at your own pace, and you do what's right for you. And there's no pressure. There's no sense that, because you're not talking about it, then there's something wrong. And I always worry that, oh my gosh, I'm okay? Am I almost too okay? Should I be, going to bed?
Self check-in.
Yeah. But you know what? I am okay. And yes, there are times where I'll hear a bit of music on the radio, or even a smell or something. I walk past someone and they were obviously wearing the same deodorant that he used to wear. So there are little things that will bring that back into focus. But it's
You're
not
aware
such a
of
big.
it then, aren't you? And you can, and again, it is that you're in control. The one thing, or the things that a perpetrator takes away from you, is power and control. So when you're at a point where you start to process things, you're in control of where you get the help, when you get the help. You're taking that control back over your life. And that, I think, is one of the most freeing feelings, isn't it?
It's liberating. I always think back to do you remember, was it Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise when they got divorced?
Yeah.
And there was that photograph of her kind of going, yeah, like that. And it does feel like that. It is really, really liberating. It really is, when you do suddenly realize that the only person who controls your life is you. And what an amazing feeling that is,
Yeah,
it really is.
I love that. I think that's a brilliant way to end the episode. Personally, take the control back, and it can happen, and it is possible. And thank you so much, because honestly, the hope that you give and the awareness that you raise is huge. And one thing I don't know if it's said enough to you is, it's amazing that you want to share. Like you say earlier, a lot of people don't want to, and that's their choice. It's down to choice. And you're making it part of your life's work to make sure that is what you're doing, and you are doing an amazing job of it, I have to say. And I am very grateful that you would come on and have a chat with me, and and it's just amazing, and it should be just a normal conversation, really.
It's, you and I were, it's cold now, my cup of tea, and we're just normal people living everyday normal lives. Things have happened, but life is really, really good now. And like I said, nothing special about me. I am what I am. But look, if just one person looks at me and thinks, well, she's done it, so can I, then absolutely, then I will scream from the rooftops about this.
I love it.
If I have to. You'll be bored silly of me.
No, never. Oh, well, thank you so much, Ruth. Thank you for taking the time.
Lucy. It's been so lovely to chat, and like you might have noticed, I could chat for days. But
listen, we could do like a 10-parter, I'm sure, but do another at some point. By the way, no, thank you so much.
You know where I am. No, bless you. Thank you so much.